Hey guys, welcome to the Erie Side Podcast with your hosts, Dee,
Sophia, and Elena.
We appreciate you guys listening, and I hope you are ready to get on the Erie side.
Whoop, whoop.
Before we get into the show, we would appreciate if you all could give the podcast a follow and make sure the bell notification is turned on so you'll be notified when we drop an episode. If you enjoy the show, we would love to have you leave us a review, and if there's a case suggestion or any feedback you'd like to share, feel free to send us a message in the text box below. Share the podcast with family, friends, co-workers, or really anyone you think they will enjoy it. Please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Okay, everybody. Today, I am going to go through a case that's of Patrick Warren and David Spencer. Patrick Warren was born in 1985, and he was one of 6 children in his family. In 1996, he was 11 years old, and he stood 4'10" and had sandy hair and light eyes. He went by the nickname Patty. According to his mother, he was a funny boy who liked to tease her. His favorite sport was football, which is soccer. By all accounts, he was a normal, playful boy. David Spencer was born in 1983. In 1996, he was 13 years old, and he stood 4'7" and had reddish-brown hair and brown eyes. David was smart and streetwise, according to his teachers. There is a bit of an elephant in the room when it came to David. While Patrick didn't get into trouble, David did. He got into fights and often resorted to violence to get his point across. He was removed from the normal school system as a result of this. His family didn't believe these issues were indicative of who David was as a person. Rather, they speak to the fact that he was ill-equipped to handle conflict in a healthy way. He was a kid. He got into trouble. That does not mean he was less valuable or less deserving of our attention. On the evening of Boxing Day 1996, which is December 26th, and 28 years ago.
What's Boxing Day?
Boxing Day is a holiday that they celebrate in some countries in Europe, and it's the day after Christmas.
I think they go into the ocean in their bathing suits, right? That's what I saw on the Christmas movie on Netflix. It's a children's Christmas movie that was just released. And it's a British one, and they all go into the ocean the day after Christmas for Boxing Day. I think that's how they celebrate it. That's at least how they did celebrate it in the movie.
I have no idea.
Oh. I thought it had something to do with the sport boxing.
It has nothing to do with the sport of boxing.
You're definitely an American if you think that.
On the evening of Boxing Day of 1996, which is December 26th, and 28 years ago, best friends Patrick Warren and David Spencer left their Chelmsley Wood residences, which is a large housing estate of historically working-class families on the edge of Birmingham, England, to play outside. Patrick left on his brand-new bicycle, which had been a Christmas present, while David was on foot. The boys had been spotted by a police officer earlier that afternoon, playing with another group of children in Meriden Park, where they had been warned by the officer not to play on the frozen pond. After returning home, they told their parents of their plans to visit one of Patrick's brothers that evening. In the morning, Derek Warren, another one of Patrick's brothers, went looking for the boys the next day when he found out they had not arrived.
I just want to make sure I understand the timeline. So they went out and they were at a park, and then they came home and they told their parents they were going to go and look for Patrick's brother. They went to Patrick's house. They were going to go look for Patrick's brother. And since they left the house, no one has seen them.
I think they each went to their own family's home, told them they were going to Patrick's brother's that evening.
So after they left their own houses.
They were supposed to go to Patrick's brother. I think they were planning on staying there overnight.
Okay. So that was the last time that anyone has heard of them.
When they left their home to go to Patrick's brother's house.
How do you know that this is the last time anyone's ever heard of them?
I guess I'm making an assumption.
Do you know the story?
No, I don't actually. I'm just making an assumption, but I just want to make sure I understand
So you're spoiling it for
where
everyone.
I am in the timeline. No, I'm not spoiling it.
The last known sighting of the boys was just after midnight by a petrol station attendant who gave them a packet of biscuits. The boys took off afterwards. This was 12:45 a.m. and was the last confirmed sighting of the boys. The petrol station attendant said she saw the boys walking toward the local shopping center. So what happened was the boys didn't go straight to Patrick's brother. They did a few other things and then headed there. In addition, they did have the boys leaving the petrol station on video. When the boys didn't return to their homes the next day, they were reported missing. The investigation was very low level at first. A lot of door-to-door questioning and pleas to the boys via interviews on TV and in the newspaper. But as time stretched on, efforts grew more desperate and concentrated. The police initially treated the boys' disappearance as a normal missing person inquiry, but despite no confirmed sightings of them after Boxing Day, senior officers told the media that there was no reason to suppose that they had come to any harm.
Why did they treat it so like low level at first, and why did they think that there is like no harm? Like, where is the evidence for that?
I will get into it.
Oh, okay.
On December 27th, Patrick's brand new red Apollo bicycle was found abandoned behind the petrol station near the bins, although the police did not realize that it was his until several weeks later.
Where was it again?
At the petrol station.
Oh, it's found behind the petrol station, which is where they last saw them. Okay.
Will you get into why it took them so long?
Why they realized it was the boys?
Yeah.
I don't know why it took them so long. The boys' disappearance received little media attention beyond the local press and what has been cited as an example of missing white girl syndrome. However, the boys' faces were among the first to appear on milk cartons in a groundbreaking campaign launched by the National Missing Person Helpline in April of 1997. Just days after the boys disappeared, 17-year-old Nicola Dixon was found raped and murdered in a graveyard 8 miles away in Sutton Coldfield. Though her killer was found and convicted, the police say that police resources and media attention between Christmas of 1996 and New Year's Day of 1997 was dominated by the Dixon case.
Oh, okay. I see what's happening here. Wow. That's very disappointing, to say the least.
Correct. There's also more to it than just that.
Oh, great.
I'll be getting into it. A few theories have been discussed when it comes to the fate of Patrick and David. As with most missing children cases, there was the ever-present runaway theory. If they were going to run away, why would Patrick dump his bike at a petrol station? It was his Christmas present. It was a big present for him. It was probably his most treasured possession. I don't think he would have left it within 24 hours of getting it. If he was going to run away, he would take his bike, if nothing else, to cover a lot of more ground. Even in 1998, police thought there was a possibility Patrick and David may have gone to Ireland on a teenage adventure.
What?
Although there was no evidence they went to Ireland.
Obviously, because a couple of teenagers can't just randomly get to Ireland.
Yeah. Well, they're 11 and 13. Only Patrick was 13.
Also, they don't even have the money for that.
Correct. They had no money on them. As time stretched on and the boys did not resurface, however, this theory was written off as being extremely unlikely. Professor David Wilson, a criminologist, who studied the police initial response to the boys' disappearance, concluded that David and Patrick's working class background affected how their case was handled. And I quote, "If it had been two boys from middle class Solihull that went missing, the case would have been treated initially very differently. And it's about the word we never allowed to use, class. This was about a class judgment that was made which was prepared to see them as runaways as opposed to vulnerable." End quote. Next, the theory of the boys being in some sort of accident was also discussed, as the subsequent searches would have led to the discovery or something related to the incident, footprints, clothing, or the boys themselves. Of course, it is possible that the boys wandered somewhere off the beaten path and met their ends at the hands of some misadventure and just haven't been found yet. But that doesn't seem likely based on the fact that Patrick's bike was found. This means that there is really only one credible theory when it comes to what happened to Patrick Warren and David Spencer, and that is foul play. And there is a person of interest. A man named Brian Field lived only a few miles away from where the boys went missing. He had served time in the 1980s for kidnapping two boys. After he was caught driving under the influence, his DNA was linked to the kidnap, rape, and murder of a Surrey schoolboy named Roy Tutil in 1968. Field was jailed for life in 2001 for this. He has a proven track record of violent, predatory behavior aimed at boys around Patrick and David's age. He was also considered for the murder of another boy committed in Solihull in 1984.
Wow. It's clear that this guy has a track record for this kind of behavior. So I'm curious. So I'm assuming that there's no DNA ever found on the bike or anywhere near the car to compare to this guy. But I'm curious to see if they've interviewed him for this murder and how he acted and what he said.
I will get into that. They have interviewed him. As far as the bike, there is no mention that they've checked for DNA. I am going to assume that in 1996 they did not check for DNA. Considering they thought they were runaways, I don't even think they thought of even checking the bike for that.
They could have checked it now, though, if it's still in evidence somewhere.
They have no evidence at all.
At all of any sort of DNA.
Nothing.
No. That's a shame.
For someone to kidnap two children at once, I've learned that you have to be experienced to do that. So the fact that this man, Brian, has kidnapped two children at once before really would not be surprising if he was involved in this at all.
Yeah, it's not easy to kidnap two kids, have no one see anything, leave no evidence behind, and never have the bodies discovered. Nothing. It takes experience to do that. So I would agree.
And don't forget that he had done this in the 1980s, and now we're in the 1990s.
If he is involved in this, hypothetically, I just don't see him stopping in between and having such a large cooling off period. But these boys are 11 and 13, so they're not even under the age of 10. And so to be able to convince both of them to either get in a car or to capture both of them unwillingly, like that takes some experience with this.
I'm guessing that the two boys that he was convicted of, I'm just going to assume that those weren't even the first ones either. Because to just start off with two.
That's right.
He has a record from 1968.
Such a long time.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
In 2003, West Midlands police publicly announced that they had arrested a 37-year-old man in connection with the disappearances. He was later released on bail and has never been charged. Then in 2006, on the 10th anniversary of Patrick and David's disappearance, the families were given fresh hope. West Midlands police reopened the case, known as Operation Stanley, and officers quizzed convicted murderer Brian Field, who was in his 70s at the time. Field was officially named as a suspect in 2006. Field denied involvement, and there was insufficient evidence to charge him. Unfortunately, there was no evidence on which to officially connect him to the case, and there still isn't. In addition, on this 10th anniversary of the disappearance, the boys were the subject of BBC Crime Watch special Appeal for Information, which drew no fresh leads. Following a second Crime Watch appeal, fresh new leads were announced by the police. In 2006, the police announced they were closer than ever to solving the mystery of what happened to the boys, but despite renewed hope from the families, no one has ever been charged with their abduction. David and Patrick were found to have been last seen close to Field's home at the time in Solihull. Field had worked as a self-employed gardener in the area for a number of local families and had access to open ground in the area and was a regular drinker in pubs close to the boys' homes. He had also worked as a gardener for the family of the boy murdered in 1984.
Oh, that's interesting.
And now I'm starting to wonder if he was stalking these boys.
Field had received 6 previous convictions for sexual offenses against boys, including a 1986 conviction for abducting 2 boys aged 13 and 16 in his car with the intent of raping them. After offering the boys a lift, he threatened them with a wheel brace and told them to remove their clothes, but the boys were able to escape after jumping from the moving car.
Wait, he threatened them with a what?
Wheel brace.
What is that?
Yeah, I'm also confused on that one.
It's a lug wrench. It's for cars to change the tires of the car.
So for our listeners, it's essentially a lug wrench, and I looked that up, and it's just like a long metal sort of tool that people use for cars.
West Midlands police theory is that Field was driving around the area of the boys' last sighting in a van on the night of their disappearance, and that he was doing so under the influence of alcohol. This was notable as Field was known to have turned violent when drunk, and that he committed most of his crimes while intoxicated. Field himself said after confessing to Tootil's murder that alcohol was a trigger for him wanting to commit criminal acts. Evidence also existed which indicated that Field had been speaking to the boys days before their disappearance.
No way.
What?
Suggesting that he may have groomed them in the lead up to their last sighting. This could explain why no one heard screams or a struggle on the night of the boys' disappearance, as they may have already known Field and got into his vehicle willingly.
Okay, so I was wondering about that because I know the station worker had given them biscuits. I was like, did the station worker not see anything? But if they had known him, they wouldn't have assumed it was a dangerous situation, so they may not have done anything to alert the station worker. And I was also wondering about why would they just leave their bike there? See, even if Brian had said, hey, come on, I can give you a ride to your brother's house or whatever, I was confused as to why they would leave their bike there, or because why Patrick would leave his bike there, because then he would still have to go back to get it another time.
Was the bike left at that station?
I think it was left at that station.
Oh, okay, interesting. But they didn't find it till later.
They found it, but they didn't know.
They didn't know it
was
was till later.
Right, till later. They never made the connection till weeks later.
Did they notice it was broken or anything like that?
No, it wasn't broken.
I was going to say if it was broken, he could have said, oh, it's okay, I'll give you a ride.
It was a brand new bike. He just got it.
Well, I don't know if he accidentally fell and it broke, like a chain broke or something. But
If Brian had told them, hey, I'll give you a ride to your brother's place and don't worry about your bike. I'll pick it up afterwards and drop it at your house. I could definitely see him being very persuasive and trying to come across like he's just their friend and very willing to help. Maybe it was some situation like that.
Yes, I'm not sure, but I could tell you the police suspected that Field had lured the boys from outside the shop they were last seen visiting, killed them, and then buried their bodies.
And the police only started to really gather these theories 10 years after their disappearance?
I'm not sure exactly when they started thinking about it. I do know they started talking about it more openly in 10 years after the boy's disappearance.
That's a bit frustrating for me to hear, because if you have a child predator in the area who has kidnapped 2 boys in the past who are around the ages of Patrick and David, and then these 2 boys, Patrick and David, go missing, and they're the same type for Brian, it frustrates me if it took them this long to really dig into Brian as a suspect.
I'm not even sure when they had connect field with anything. Officers dug up land in 2006, the field used as a dumping ground at Old Damson Lane in Solihull, but they did not find anything. In 2016, a fresh appeal for information was launched. DCI Caroline Marsh of West Midlands Police stated her belief that both boys were deceased and said that the force would never close the case until they had learned what had happened to them.
I have some questions about the case. Did they ever send dogs on Brian's lawn, like cadaver dogs, to see if they picked up anything?
I don't know, but if they did, it would have been so many years later. They did not do anything or looking for them early on. Don't forget, 2 years later, they still thought the boys may still be in Ireland.
So really, they made assumptions about these boys, and that hindered them doing the proper investigation right away.
I would agree. Because I know there was a camera that saw them leaving, and the direction that they were leaving in and like towards the brother's house, what kind of road, if you know, what kind of way was that?
They were seen going to the shopping center. Remember?
Yeah.
And I do not know what the road was like. There's no mention of what the video showed of them. And if it's 1990s, it was probably not very clear.
Right, but like the path that they were most likely taken on, like do we know what kind of road it was?
No,
if it was
nothing. There's no mention of what they saw, what road, anything.
That's frustrating. I would hope that they would know the general area of where they were taken. They don't have to release that, but I would hope that they would know that.
The attendant said that they were heading towards the shopping center. The police never said anything different. So I'm assuming that's exactly what is being seen.
Oh, okay. So that they were taken on the way to the shopping center, and that's somewhere in that frame?
I assume there is no mention of it. And obviously, they probably didn't think anything of it because 2 years later, they still thought they were runaways.
Right.
In 2021, criminologist David Wilson released a documentary as part of his Footsteps of Killers series on the subject of David's and Patrick's disappearance, in which he spoke to Graham Hill, the detective that got Field to confess to Tutill's murder in 2001. Hill interviewed Field a number of times about the boy's disappearance for West Midlands Police and said that he believed Field was responsible for the murder. After the release of Wilson's Footsteps of Killers documentary in 2021, locals organized a dig of a field off Dempson Wood Lane in Solihull after a tip-off was received from a man who said he had seen a man digging there at the time of the boy's disappearance. This is the same field they had dug up before.
How many years was it this tip came in later?
I don't know, but it's in 2021 they started digging.
That's ridiculous.
The now adult brother of David Spencer helped organize the search. Field died in prison in February 2024, aged 87. The boys have never been found.
Wait, what year did he die again?
2024.
Oh, okay, so it was this year.
Correct.
What month?
February.
Oh, okay.
Do you have pictures to send us? Who's the redhead?
David.
Oh, we could see the bike. It's a cute bike. It's actually a really nice bike. Yeah, I could understand why I would not want to leave that bike behind.
The first boy is David, the redhead.
I know, but who's the person on the milk carton?
They got Patrick on first.
So Patrick is the blonde and David's
Correct.
the redhead.
Correct. And the guy at the end is the suspect.
This is a frustrating case because not saying that Brian is the person who did that, but he's a very possible suspect. And I just wish that, one, the investigation was handled correctly right off the bat and not just assume that these kids somehow could afford a way to Ireland and just be living out there on their own. And actually done the investigation correctly, like right in the beginning. It's just frustrating that I wish that they could have had like more time to interview Brian and try to get some information out of him or somehow find a way to further investigate like his property. But unfortunately, it seems like that's just likely never gonna happen. And because Brian's now dead, I don't feel like we're gonna be getting an answer unless somehow the bodies are discovered.
I was watching another documentary about England, and they didn't start a case for pedophiles and individuals who were dangerous to children to many, many years later. And I think it was not seen as important or realistic that this was happening, even though they knew. I think theories in the 80s and 90s were a little bit different. And I don't think till much later did they started taking things like this more serious. So unfortunately, I think not only are they a victim of class, I think their story is also a victim of how pedophilia was treated and acted upon back then.
They just wanted to ignore that's a possibility and just try to pretend like they just ran away on their own.
Yes, I think it was the typical someone's missing, oh, they ran away kind of story.
Yeah, rather than something bad happened to them.
Yes, I don't think it was they didn't think bad things could happen. I just think the way they treated it and thought about it wasn't their first thought process of let's also look at other options.
Right. I think in their mind, they're probably, that's too crazy. That's so unlikely. And the reality is that is a very likely situation when two young boys go missing.
Considering that he was known to do that and had done that in the area, I don't think he was in any other area. I don't know if he had moved.
Well, actually, did they know about him at the time of their disappearance, or wasn't it until later?
It sounded like they were aware of him creating crimes. I just wasn't sure if it was something they would look into. Like nowadays, if something happens, they do look to see who the sexual predators are in your area, and they do question them and want to make sure that their alibi is strong. But I don't think that was the way things were handled back then.
How were you saying that the police viewed this back then?
As the runaways, as they were runaways.
My one thought is I also wonder how seriously they took sexual crimes against males, especially.
She said that they didn't really want to believe it.
It's just really sad that the families don't have any closure and can't even have their bodies.
The families really suffered after this. First, they were pleading for the boys to come home because they did believe that what the policeman told them that they had run away.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It makes sense because as a parent, I feel like you'd want to believe that rather than your child was just murdered. And if someone with authority comes and says, you know, your kid ran away, you're going to want to believe that over the much worse alternative.
Afterwards, when they didn't show up in time past, it affected both families very much. David's mother became ill. Both families had severe issues to deal with after that. It took a toll on the families.
Yeah, that's just awful.
And one of David's brother just wants to find him and bring him home and bury him. So he's been doing digs here and there.
That's good.
I do know that this was a very hard part of their lives.
Yeah, I feel like this is definitely a case where you're only going to get closure from either a confession or from finding a body. So at least that the brother is actively searching. And I feel like that's the only way that this case could see any sort of closure.
I have a theory. I think Brian did kill them, buried them in that plot. But I think after things cooled down, I think he unburied them, buried them somewhere else.
Oh, yeah.
Just my theory, because they knew he used that area as a dump and threw things in. But they have gone and dug that area many times and have not found anything. So I have a theory that after things cooled down, he went and moved them. I don't know where he would have put them, but I think that's what he did.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if that's what happened. The way I picture this town is surrounded by forest.
I'm not sure about that.
In a farm area, right? Because he had land, at least, Brian.
No, No, Brian did not have land. He just had a dump place he dumped things.
Oh,
in.
okay.
Because he was gardener, he had a little piece of area that he knew he could go dump things.
He could have just transported the bodies to any random area of land. Who knows where it is now?
And they were dead. Maybe he didn't want to bury them in that area just in case. And maybe he did go far and buried them and came back. No one knows. We have no idea.
We know that he committed his first crime, at least the first crime we know about, maybe even earlier, in 1968. He wasn't even put away until, I think, 2001. And that's a long time for somebody who is comfortable enough and successful enough in these, if we're believing that he did do this to David and Patrick, to capture multiple boys at once, kidnap them, probably torture them and kill them. I'm just wondering how many more are there, because so many decades before you were put in prison, that's alarming.
Also, I'm wondering where he put the bodies of the boys that we at least know that he murdered, the one that he was convicted of. Where did they find the body, if they did?
In the articles I read, they didn't mention anything about the other boys.
Oh, interesting. Because I was wondering if they didn't find the bodies and maybe he has like a whole burial site that we don't know about, or if they did and it was just some random lot. Maybe he's just randomly dumping them. I don't know.
I could tell you that Solihull is a good enough town, but around Solihull, if you move out, it does seem like it gets more foresty. So he may have had other areas that he could dump things.
I mean, he could just drive out to a random spot in the forest and no one would really know unless it got discovered by accident.
Actually, where the boys lived, after a while, you could actually see a more foresty area, but you have to leave the town. So he could go anywhere and bury them or throw them, whatever he wanted. And if he knew the area, then he knew where to go and he knew whether or not anyone would find them.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate.
He's a gardener too, and I'm sure he's got some skill sets from that. And he probably pays more attention and notices more things. I was saying he can probably tell just by looking at areas how disturbed it is or not, how many people go there. I'm sure being a gardener has some skill sets that benefited him in disposing of bodies.
He probably knows where to go and how populated the areas are, where he can drop a body off and not be found. After you leave this area that the boys live, it starts becoming less populated. So I don't think it would have been that difficult for him to just drive off with them, tell them he was taking them somewhere. You have no idea what he told them, especially if he was grooming them. So 30 years after he did the first murder that we are aware of, he had enough knowledge to groom kids.
That's what's so scary, is how many were there.
We'll never know because he wouldn't admit to anything.
And that land is so vast. I mean, there could be dozens, hundreds even.
You would think they would know by now how many kids are missing in England and where he was if they can connect the dots.
Also, he would know how to properly, like, after digging up a hole and burying them, he would know how to, like, properly seal that hole so it doesn't look like it was buried. Because he's a gardener, he would know how to, like, properly fix things and make them look nice. If they went by, no one would probably even think anything happened.
I just feel sorry for the boys and for their families.
Same here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to thank you for listening to us this week. We love our listeners, and because of you, we do this podcast. Your help and engagement really helps the podcast grow. If you enjoyed this episode, please text a friend and family member to listen to our podcast. Until next time, make sure you stay on the eerie side. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Be safe.